welcome along to everyone to this live webinar, wherever you're watching around the world. We'll be discussing how technology can help develop the football stars of tomorrow. And I'm delighted to say we have a great forward-thinking English Premier League club lined up for you to talk about how they use Pixellot technology across the academy to develop players to reach their ultimate goal of the first team. Southampton Football Club is proven in its success at turning young potential into excellence, with a clear pathway of producing a significant amount of talent through the years, including the likes of James Ward-Prowse, Gareth Bale, Theo Walcott, and many more, to name but a few. Youth is very much at the heart of what they do, and you'll hear it more in detail today. And I'm delighted to say we have Nathan Hurst, who heads up the Academy Performance Analysis Department at Southampton Football Club. Nathan, great to have you here today. Can you just give us a little bit around your background and how you become to where you are today?
First, I'll give a little warning that my dog is around, so fortunately if she joins, then she might have to sit on my lap. But in terms of my background, so I've been at the club my whole analysis career. So I started in 2015 as the foundation phase analyst, and that was alongside my university degree as a placement year. And then I went back for my final year of studies, and I went part-time and casual, where I worked with the under 14s. And then upon finishing uni, was lucky to go straight into a full-time job with the under 16s. And then since then, when I've taken on my new job, which I've been in for 3 years, I've worked with the 18s and 23s. So lucky to have worked across all the different phases across the club.
And what piece of advice would you have to your younger self when you first started out, to perhaps people that are on this call today? What advice would you give to them in terms of your journey to get where you are today? Is there a little bit of you playing the game at a semi-pro level is probably perhaps where you've kind of helped elevate what you're doing today? Or is it, what piece of advice would you give to people watching today?
I think for me personally, I've got some sort of football playing experience, albeit low level, and the rest of our analysis team, not particularly everyone's got a playing experience, but I think that shouldn't be a separation as to why you can be a good analyst or not. But I suppose from my background, it has helped. But in terms of advice, I'd probably just say about relationships is the biggest thing for me. I haven't got a master's degree, which is pretty much normal for most analysts, but I think because I've built those relationships at the club, I think being yourself and just being comfortable with who you are in your own skin, I think that was a bit for me, but obviously always being a sponge to learning. So that's the biggest thing for me, really.
And just a little bit around your role today, what does your day look like? So if you're driving into work, you get through Southampton training ground, you come to your desk, what does the day look like from start to finish? Just talk us through the full day today.
Yeah, so I suppose as my main part of the role is that I head up the department, so the Academy Analysis Department, that is. So I oversee the analysis provision from under 9s to the B team. So part of that, I suppose, is just the day-to-day management, so whether that's scheduling, stuff like that, all that kind of boring stuff at the management side. But the other bit of my role is the individual development analyst side. So that's the bit that kind of the typical analyst working with players, coaches, that's the bit that really gets my juices flowing, really. So on a Monday morning, or with the under 18s, because their schedule's week to week, or the first day back in for the B team, I'll sit in their multidisciplinary team meetings, and then we kind of go through each player one by one and just see what their needs are. So I'm always keeping a keen ear to see which players need extra analysis this week. Is there any players that the whole team of the multidisciplinary team are targeting that I feel that I can help in any way? And also, I suppose, if there's any target players that we just think as a club we need to target, then just making sure that they're getting some provision at least once every 2 weeks.
And what does that analysis look like then? So when you're taking a player, whatever age group or gender, what does that analysis look like when you sit down with them? And how critical is video as part of that analysis piece to the player itself?
Yeah, I think like for us, like we're heavily video based as much as we do use data. And I think one of our biggest things that we push for is providing the players with as much ownership as possible. So everything that we do, from around 11 years old, we try and get players used to talking in front of their peers, just analysing their own game. And then that obviously, an 11-year-old wouldn't analyse their game in detail as a B team player, but just trying to create that habit so that when they're not on site, they're still thinking about their game in a way that they're constantly thinking about improving. And in terms of the way that analysis works, I suppose at each phase, like in the under 9s to 11s, we're very much just, we film every game at home and just make sure that they've got the opportunity to watch their game back. And then moving through to the 12s, 13s, 14s, we're kind of getting them probably more 12s, 13s, where they're a little bit more comfortable to speak in front of each other. We're just constantly trying to get them to lead some team sessions, stuff like that. And then as they move into that adolescent phase where they probably get a little bit reluctant to speak in front of their peers, like hopefully we're quite good that we've got like a good group of players, and obviously the staff really promote that they should be comfortable doing it. But again, we're just really trying to push them to take ownership over their own development.
Obviously data is great in terms of helping shape what you do on a field of play and the understanding of the game, but is there a kind of, I guess, a recommendation or a methodology that you have at the club that is, okay, from the age of X, this player should have data as combined with video to understand the game more?
Yeah, I suppose for us, we introduce it under 15, and the way that we do it, so we send off our games to Stats Perform. So the reason we choose Stats Perform is because it's the same for 18s Premier League, the PL2 for the under 23s and for the Premier League. So we know that we're collecting data in the exact same way all the way through to our first team. And the reason we chose 15s, I suppose, one, because that's the start of a new phase, which is the last phase before they get into the professional development phase. But our strategy at that point is that at 15, 16, they should have experienced pretty much everything that they can like use in analysis. So we might drip feed some opposition analysis in. So everything they would expect to get in the first team, they have by 16. And I suppose the reason for that is because, one, we could have a 16-year-old go and join the first team. So they should be comfortable, and like if something gets provided to them, they know what it is. But also it's so that when they get to 18, they can make a decision. So once they're sort of, as a scholar, they're then full-time in football, they have to then, with that ownership piece, that they have to make a decision. Is it data that I like? Is it video that I like? Is it both? Do I want someone come and do my technique analysis because I really love analysis? Or we're quite comfortable to say, if you don't like analysis at all, but you're finding a way to cope and you like the gym, that's fine. But I think for us with data, at 15 is probably a good level where players can switch on enough to be able to take in the information we provide.
And just in terms of the academy itself, I mean, for the international listers that are listening into this webinar today, they'll very much know, you would have thought, Southampton Football Club, because they are a part of the English Premier League and have been for quite a few years now. But to those that perhaps would know the names that I mentioned at the start, Gareth Bales of this world, like, what is the kind of strategy within your academy team and within the wider club for promoting the stars of tomorrow to get them into the first team, or even to onward sell them to have a career into the game? What is the kind of the strategy that you're getting from above into the academy to enable you to get players into the first team?
Yeah, so we've kind of changed our strategy recently, but as a coaching department, like, I think it's quite clear that people would say, you want the players that are the best technically, tactically, physically. But I think our coaching team look now for adaptable players, independent players, and resilient players. So everything that we do, not just as analysis, but across the whole club, we're trying to build that. So players that can basically think for themselves, so that, like, I think I use this like example with players quite a lot. So from an analysis point of view, the difference between them being a good analyst and a top player is that they can see what is the issue on the pitch. They can stand in a different position, or they can change their body shape. They can change their decisions in the moment. Whereas the ones that kind of fall out of the game or play at a low level are the ones that they can see it afterwards, but they can't affect the game in the moment. And I think that's the bit where we're trying to get to. So all of our processes, we're just trying to get them to be better. This happens across from our under nines all the way through to the B team, is that all of the departments, so whether that's analysis, coaching, psychology, medical, sports science, can't remember if I said them, player care, like kit and equipment, like everybody gets involved in these meetings just to make sure that we have a all-round view on each player. So this example that I've got, like, this is something that we were discussing in B team NDT. So it's like, basically we had a player who when he gets into a specific area of the pitch, he doesn't speed up with the ball. So like one of the questions that was asked would be, is he going to be able to run the speed of in the Premier League? So almost that's like a potential piece. Like that sort of question alone is almost like, is that a physical thing? Is it a tactical understanding thing? So I suppose the sports scientists in there will be like, oh, okay, has he got the physical potential? So then the questions, they won't get answered in that moment, but we'll go away as a team. And in this case study example, like the sports scientist went away and created an amazing gym program for this lad to make sure that he, in these moments, he is running with the ball like at speed as physically he can do it. And I suppose the question that like rings alarms to an analyst or a coach is like, is it a lack of tactical understanding? So in this example, we sat down with the lad, we showed him examples of when he hasn't done it, examples of when the top elite players, so his role model is Kevin De Bruyne, so showing him clips of Kevin De Bruyne doing it and the importance of it, showing him examples of our first team doing it, because obviously in our academy we play the same way as our first team. So in that moment we're basically saying like, this is really important, you need to be able to do it. We're not saying that you can't do it, but we need to talk about times when you should be doing it in the game and stuff like that. So and then in this case study, we were very lucky that the lad ended up like in games. Like, so our sports scientist, he in the under 18s, he codes the games using iCoder live for any physical actions. So like if he sees like something really good physically, so he was looking out, and I remember both of us being sat there like absolutely buzzing, both pressing buttons, coding, like, yes, he's just finally doing it. So at no means would I say that it was all me, and hopefully he would say the same and say it's not all him, but as a collective, I suppose that's what these NDTs are about, is that we're all pushing in the same direction just to improve the player, really.
Do you find that some players very much are more absorbent to information around the video and data they're provided to understand the game better, as opposed to others? I think we were talking before the call, like, maybe it's a perceptional thing, but someone like a Frank Lampard, I used to work with Chelsea Football Club from the media side, but kind of worked with him a bit. And whenever he does commentary, you can definitely understand, obviously he's gone on to be a manager now, his technical understanding and tactical awareness of a game is, in my opinion, second to none. Do you kind of sort of look at it from through your lens and kind of say, actually, you've got 2, 3, 4 players out of the squad of, or I guess across all the age groups that you have, these guys that are kind of top of the class that you think actually they really understand the tactical side of the game? Yeah,
for sure. Like, you got almost like the students of the game and such, that the way that I like to look at it is almost like how, like when you put like the team on a graph, almost like how high is their buy-in? So how much do they actually want to sit in and do a meeting with analysis? Are they the ones that are at the front and they're putting their hands up every time to answer the question? Are they the ones asking questions back? Are they the ones creating clips of themselves every week to go and sit down with the coach? Like, they're the ones that clearly they are a student of the game and they want to improve. And then you've got the lads who they might not buy into it at all, but they're just naturally gifted. So again, I'm using an example off the top of my head, but Messi, I'm not saying that he might not need to do analysis because he's so creative and he's so instinct that he doesn't need it. I've never worked with Messi and I don't know anyone that has, but like my point is just being that there's some people that's just naturally gifted. So yeah,
because I think to use another star, I guess, of the last 10 to 15 years, Cristiano Ronaldo, he was very much the first category of could run with the ball very, very quick and speed. And perhaps the technical analysis side of the game was probably come over the years, and his understanding of the game's got better. Because if you think back to when he was first at Man United, he was very much in that first bracket of speed, perhaps lacked some of the other bits until he moved on to Real Madrid, and we all know what happened since then. So it'd be interesting to know from your side, have you seen many players that have had three of those categories all rolled into one and have developed at a speed that you think actually these can make the first team at some stage?
Yeah, I think in terms of like where we are in catchment, like, I mean, half of our catchment is the sea, so unfortunately can't get fish to come and play in the Premier League. But so we don't have like, in terms of, I don't know, your London teams, like we have a London centre, but in terms of our catchment, they're not typically they're not the best physically, but we end up working closely with the lads who are probably a little bit more advanced in the brain. So like, I think where we sit compared to some of those London clubs or other inner city clubs across the country, like we don't really have someone that has that physical prowess. But I think the example I gave just a minute ago, like that lad in our under 18s, like he's probably one that's got a good chance. But then again, like some of the lads who have broke through to our first team in recent years, so like Michael Obafemi, Nathan Teller, they're both like just examples of lads who are physically just outstanding. So I think like Nate's still in our first team now. He's a great lad. He's good off the pitch as much as his like on the pitch skills show. So I think he's probably a good example recently that probably has a good all-round package.
Yeah, and so just swing it around to the actual technology side of everything. Obviously, we began our relationship at the beginning of last season. Just give us an overview before you had Pixellot technology across the training ground and at Southampton Football Club, what you had in place before Pixellot, and I guess how Pixellot has helped you elevate across this season in different ways.
Yeah, so in terms of the way we use Pixellot, so for away fixtures, so the talent centre that I just mentioned then, so because our catchment is C, we're allowed to have a Bath regional centre and a London regional centre. So at those sites, because they're not our training ground, before we'd have to have an analyst that was out there and would have to do a manual filming using like a vantage point where like you can move left and right. Whereas I suppose the Pixellot cameras are great because we've upskilled our coaches at both those centres to set it up, and then they can travel around the country remotely and they can film the games themselves and analyse the games themselves. And then our other location for Pixellot is at us, almost like we've got like a relationship with a club called AFC Tottenham, which is like a local team where our women's team, B team and under 18s play. And we got to the point where we were all right in lockdown because there were no fans in the ground, but we were basically filming in a health and safety walkway, like a fire exit, and we weren't allowed to film there anymore. So the next best was in the way of fans. So we basically needed to come up with a way of one solution was a gantry, but like, I mean, why would we go for a gantry and have someone filming when we can use a Pixellot camera, which can take one less person out of it and get two people analysing the game? And I suppose from what we've experienced, the footage is probably better than what we were filming because it's from a higher vantage point at the top of the stand. So yeah, that's how we use Pixellot now.
And from your analysis side, are you using the broadcast view or are you using the panoramic view to do your analysis? Is there a preferred way of you analysing, or is it kind of you kind of just choose what you think's right at the time for any given moment you want to analyze?
Yeah, so we use the like the tactical angle,
Yeah.
and take the live feed from the SDI cable,
Yeah.
just so that, again, it's pretty much how we would have filmed it anyway. But because of where the camera's located, it means that we can actually see a lot more. So like if it's a dugout that's in the way, at least now it's above the dugout, or we can actually get the defenders in shot as well as like which is past the halfway line, for instance.
Obviously, for the away matches, you're taking the Pixellot Air solution. That's obviously a solution which goes up onto the 5 meter or 7 meter tripod, depending on what you've got, and still gives you that holistic view of the pitch, and you can do your analysis from that. So whilst the fixed camera is great, any game that takes place at a venue, whether it's your women's team, whether it's your under 23s, 18s, 19s, whoever plays there, the more games that take place at that venue, the better, obviously, the more use you get out of the camera. But that, just in terms of, we do this quite often at Pixellot, we say home games, if you have loads of games at a venue, use it in that venue as many times as you can for analysis purposes, or even for live streaming. I know that we're going to discuss in a few weeks around the potential of live streaming for your women's games, for example. But yeah, the Pixellot Air camera, obviously fantastic for taking in the back of your car, putting it onto a tripod, and then you've got all your footage. Obviously, coming later down the line, we're going to have the latency improved as well. So you'll have it within a sort of 4 to 6 minutes behind the game itself. So again, your analysis process, when you're going back in your car back to HQ, you can quickly plug it in and then the footage will be available for you. So how good, just quickly on that side of things, how good is the kind of what I call a mixed model around the fixed camera and the mobile systems to take to away games? How important is it to have that kind of combined offer?
I think the best bit for me is almost like both ways is that it's stored in the same place. So it doesn't matter what camera and stuff, it all gets uploaded to the same place. So it's an easy port of call for storage. But I suppose the fact that we can go away, and I suppose some clubs will use different companies for different cameras, like in that point of call. But I think that everything that we've used it for has always been reliable, and turnaround's always been good. So
what is the top tips that you can give to a young coach to adopt some of the methodologies that you clearly do at the club, and obviously do it very successfully from the back history that you've got at the club? What are the kind of main sort of tips that you'd like to give everyone out there?
Yeah, so I mean, luckily I had a bit of chance to prep some of these, but like I think the three for me, one of them is about like building those relationships, like I said at the start, but from a coach to analyst, like everything that we do at the club, I think we've been lucky, like when I first came in, that there was already the foundations of really good coach analyst relationships. But I think without those, like you can't instill any processes, you can't use video in good ways. Like the ways that we use video, like just off the top of my head, so we have 18s, B team players leading opposition meetings. If you don't have that relationship with the coach, because the coach really wants to tell the players exactly what it is, then we can't affect the players in the way that we want to. Or in our under 16s, we do loads of sessions in the dome with a TV screen pitch side. So we've got a feed coming down from the camera that when the players are doing technique analysis, we can, when the drinks breaks, we can bring them in. The coach just quickly sits down and goes through the clips with the player. But without that relationship, again, we wouldn't be able to do it. And then in terms of, sorry, the dog's got a toy. And then another one is probably about making sure it's age specific. So again, I've touched on bits, but we don't do stuff in the B team. We don't do stuff in the under 10s that we would do in the B team. Just purely, that sounds obvious, but I think some coaches like to think, oh, that looks really good what they're doing. Because I want to do it, I'll do it. It doesn't matter what age group I work with. But again, just going back to what is the player's needs, like letting kids be kids at the right age and stuff like that. And then the last one is just about giving players ownership. So it's great to have games filmed. Like I think me being biased, like in a non-league setting, I think we've got to an age where with like yourselves that teams have no excuse to not film their games because you don't need anybody to actually film it anymore. But to have video is one thing, but then after that, to just let players use it however they want to. I think times where we failed before and lost players is almost like when you're just really trying to force it down the necks, or it's quite easy to want to give a player the world. Like I remember when I first started, like I was getting a player coming every week, and then there was one week where I didn't do clips. He's like, "Where's my clips?" And I was like, "Well, you do realize how long it takes me." And then he doesn't actually. All he's doing it is because he wants to see 7 good clips of himself. So I think giving players the ownership, they'll only learn more. And I think once they understand why they're doing it and stuff like that, the steeper their development, and we'll have more self-driven players as a collective across the world, really.
And I'm just looking at your website when I was doing research this morning. It's the Academy's vision to produce a first team of around, I think it's 50% made up of Academy graduates in the first team squad. Like how realistic is that? Obviously, everyone knows on this call, the English Premier League is awash with money and finance, and players come in from an international teams all around the world. How realistic is that number, and how achievable is it?
I think off the top of my head, I'm not as good as our Academy manager who can reel off the stats off the top of his head, but I think we did hit it quite a lot. So with players like James Ward-Prowse, Jack Stevens, Nathan Teller, we've got loads of players who have stayed in our first team, and they might be a bit older now, but I think we still make up quite a lot of the percentage of games. And I think, especially with a club like Southampton, we're not going to go and splash the cash of, I wouldn't even say your big 6 now. Like you got Villa spending big, you got other teams that are spending big. It's hard to compete. So I think having an aspiration like that just suggests that we want to do everything homegrown, because ideally we'd keep them for our first team, and players like James Ward-Prowse would be filled. But if it doesn't happen and we end up selling the likes of Luke Shaw, Callum Chambers, Matt Target, anything like that, I think that's still a good almost business model for a club like ours.
So obviously this call is all about understanding you and the workings of Southampton Football Academy, and how you're using technology to make your players understand the game better and develop into the first team. Looking into the future, obviously AI, automated camera technology that we provide to market is excellent. We've gone through the kind of use cases and case studies that's used. But in terms of what's next, what would you like personally to see in the technology space that can help move footballers forward to become the next Gareth Bale, for example?
From my opinion, from speaking to other companies and stuff out there, I almost have to do a pitch that Academy is really where the market is, because if you can nail the Academy market, then you've got a really unique company. But because I think it's easy in the Premier League when you've got a high stand and you can get every angle and you can get every player on the pitch, it's easy. But I think once more academies specifically can get a full panoramic view of their pitches, then it's just down to the companies to come up with a way of giving it really easy way of interpreting that data for us at the clubs, really. So
Mark has a question for you. I don't know if you can see it at all. I'll read it out the best I can. Mark has an under 10 player. We film all the games. He'll watch them, mark them down many times, some good and areas for improvement. I'll bring him in to show the clips and ask him what he sees. He usually is correct in what he sees. We then discuss the points before practices and games to remind him. He's strong, but then he forgets things as the game goes on and gets tired. Is this the right approach? Any tips to remind him during the games of what to do effectively?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, that sounds like a unbelievable process, and especially for an under 10 to be able to speak about their game in that way is like a good success. But I think in terms of in the game, I mean, maybe not at under 10. I think from my point of view, personally, I think as a 10-year-old, like the fact that he's remembering at the start of the game is good enough. And maybe with age, I think taking time is probably the most important thing with that one. But I think if it was something that was in our B team or under 18s, then like in our point of view, like we would do stuff with live analysis or halftime analysis, and in training sessions we have stuff pitched like that people can, like the way of like triggering them mindsets. But my opinion would be, as a under 10, I think that's a great start where you're at anyway. So
would you also say, just quick, I know you may have answered this, but less when it's under 10s, less is more, I'd say, probably in terms of information, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like I think as a strategy, almost like we're, as a department, like we say that if a player, once they leave the foundation phase under 11, if they know how to watch themselves back and they know how to reflect, that's a success for us. It's only when they get older that we start to be a little bit more critical of them and stuff. So yeah, less is definitely more.
Yeah. Just another question for you, Nathan. So Marios, if I pronounced that right, says hello. I want to ask if there are any recordings. I want to ask if we're recording away matches or exchange with other teams. If not, they are working at home matches videos.
Yeah,
quite mean there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I get it. It's in terms of like, so when we, sorry, she's been a bit needy. In terms of when we film all of our home matches, and we're lucky with the other clubs in the Premier League that when they have home games, they film a lot of their games, and then we just exchange it after. So
I think, unless we've got any other questions, I think that's it. Any final questions before we close off, or any final words that you want to give to the audience, Nathan?
No, I think in terms of like, I've just given like a little taste for what we do at Southampton. I mean, I'm biased because I'm sort of, part of my job is to make sure that we're doing it in the way that we see fit, but this is just one way of doing it. And I think I'm always intrigued in different insights. So if anybody wants to reach out afterwards on LinkedIn or whatever, then I'll be open to discussing a little bit more, really.
Excellent. Well, look, Nathan, thanks very much for taking your time out this afternoon. And thank you for your dog for being quiet during the whole session as well, because we were concerned there might be some barking going on in the room. But yeah, thank you to everyone that's joined the session today. Hopefully it's been insightful to you all. Some really interesting stuff that we are doing at Pixellot with one of the, what I would call elite Premier League football clubs in Southampton. Please join us again. If we have any more webinars coming up, please look at our LinkedIn pages or social media whenever we have a new session. Many thanks to you all. Goodbye.